making a good video game by Christians isn't going to change the world. It's just not. But making thousands or at least hundreds of people who have that kind of ethos, that really could.
This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hey, welcome to Humans of Gaming. I'm Drew Dixon. I'm the chief content nerd at Love Thy Nerd, and I'm joined by Chris Gwaltney. Hey, Chris.
Hey, it's me, Chris, and I am chief executive nerd for Love Thy Nerd, and you're here for Humans of Gaming. This is where we get to talk to people in the games industry about all sorts of things, but really what we want to do is dig down and hear about who they are as people, because we believe that their identity is not just in the things that they create, but in the stories and experiences that shape them. So we want to hear about those things.
So this week we have a really cool guest, someone Chris and I have gotten to hang out with actually in person before and have kind of developed a friendship with, so it was really cool. Chris Skaggs is what is his official title at Soma? I mean, he kind of started Soma, but I forget what he said his official title is.
Chief Boss Bro, I think.
Chief Boss Bro. That was pretty much it, word for word.
Yep.
Yeah, most notably, recently they landed the contract to do a bunch of games for
Redwall.
I'm doing great.
Yeah.
I blanked on it. Yeah, the Redwall games. So
yeah, which are those super, adorable books about mice and little furry creatures, but like in a fantasy setting. And they're from like the 90s, right? I think that's when we talk about it in the show.
Yeah, and Chris has been making games for a long time with Soma. They've been at it for a while, and they have a really unique approach, I think, to the way they make games, and a really, also, I think, are striving to create a healthy studio culture around what does it look like to make games in a way that doesn't damage the people who make them. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a big problem in the games industry today with sort of games companies. I say it's a big problem in the games industry. I think it's a problem in all industries. It's just worse maybe in gaming just because gaming is such the
demand. Yeah,
there's such a demand. It's such a profitable space. There's so much money to be made in games that there's a high temptation to exploit the people that make them. And they're really trying to fight against that while still making rad games.
There's a lot of really good learnings, maybe weirdly for this podcast, but there's a lot of good learning about like creating good culture, like creating good company culture, work culture. Like I'm even sitting there, taking notes and thinking, how do we create this kind of culture with Love Thy Nerd, like with the people that work with us or volunteer with us or, anything else in between. Like it was just, it was a lot of really cool stuff. He's a neat guy.
So Chris, how's life?
How's life? 2021 is off to a start.
I like that answer. To a start. It has begun.
What was the meme I saw that it's happy December 60th, 2020?
But I don't know. I mean, okay, so to the question, I guess, like, honestly, for me, 2020 had a legit end in the real sense that at work, we had this big milestone for us, which was basically the end of the year. And then we took 2 weeks off and that really was a nice hard reset. And so honestly, for me, for January, we've had room to breathe. No one's rushing anything, and honestly, it feels good. And so it's pretty easy to kind of look around and say, yeah, the world's still just as weird. But personally, actually, it's got off to a smoother start. I don't know the one to say that it feels like normal. I mean, if that word even exists anymore, but it feels a lot more peaceful. I'll tell you that. And that's pretty glad for that.
That's good. Rub that one in our faces, why don't you?
I've noticed that, like, if I stay off of Twitter and also don't watch the news for a while, then it feels like things are really smooth, Isn't
that weird? Like this agitating thing.
Hey, man, that guy in The Matrix, he was onto something when he was eating that steak and he just says, ignorance is bliss.
Exactly.
Especially when you go to, what do they call it? Zion? Wasn't that what they called the real world?
Yeah.
the city, and then you go there and it's like, man, this place is a crap hole.
Who wants to live here?
Yeah.
There was an article in the Atlantic just the other day, and the headline was something like Facebook is a doomsday machine, right? And it's like only the most recent and kind of most strongly pointed kind of objection to the whole social media. But I got to tell you, like, it's a really interesting article. I'd recommend checking it out. And at the heart of everything is like going back to Dr. Strangelove, the idea that of devices like the old 60s doomsday machine that did not have the human interaction that gave it morality and purpose. It just had this goal, and it does its goal really well. And it's the unintended consequences, right, of a mega scale, right? So now I've got billions of people. I'm algorithmically deciding what they get to see, and no one wanted it to be what it is. It sort of happened that way accidentally, and that makes it really an existential threat. That's the case she's making. It's a good article.
Have you seen The Social Dilemma?
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely worth watching. And it's interesting. Like, I don't think it told me anything I didn't already know. But what's great about that documentary is that it forces you to sort of like reckon with,
deal with it,
what social media is doing to us.
Yeah.
And it's not just social media. Well, it's all sorts of things that we don't think of as social media. It's YouTube. It's like when you click on a YouTube video or search for a YouTube video or get on YouTube in general, like there's a lot of things going on that you don't realize are going on that are influencing, whether you realize it or not, how you see the world and how you're experiencing life in the world, I think.
Oh, yeah.
In a way that's kind of like terrifying if you think about it in some ways,
There was a guy on that who was talking about how as a point of conflict, how, like, what if you went to Wikipedia and everybody saw a different article because based on their preferences or whatever, or the location. And when he put it that way, I was like, oh my gosh, I never really even thought about how destructive and insidious that is. Because if you realize that the person next to you, even people who have a lot of overlapping interests and friends, like even that, they see an entirely different world than you do, and it's designed that way. And so you start to look out and you're like, how are those people believing X, right? And it's partly because, maybe it's largely because they have literally been fed that, and that's different from what you've been fed. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden this light bulb goes on. It's like, that's super not healthy.
Something like kind of related to this idea, you just reminded me of this a while back. I would assume they're still on Netflix, but Netflix did these decades series where it was, like the 60s, and there was like, however many episodes just all about the 60s and pop culture and history stuff and government stuff, like just, a snapshot of the 60s and then 70s, 80s. And I forget which decade it was, if it was 60s or 70s, but there was an episode or maybe even a few episodes about the news and how, we got into this like 24-hour news cycle thing that we're in now. And basically what it talked about was literally the monetization of news and how it turned from this like, mostly unbiased, just kind of like sharing the facts, like what happened, and turned into profit, like a for-profit business, basically. And how that changed the whole industry. And really is probably why we have what we have today, where it's like, at the end of the day, these companies have to make money, and certain things make more money than other things. Certain things get more views, more likes, more engagement than other kinds of things. And even the way you report things, right? Like the sensationalism or the, all that kind of stuff. So it's
I'd go
wild.
deeper though. Like, isn't advertising really, I think that it's the driver of this thing, because advertising becomes the monetization path for everything. If it weren't for advertising, you wouldn't have 24-hour news, because they're competing over, you think about the 50s news show, and it was, you get like 2 commercial breaks, right? Like there's Tide and there's Tide, right? Like, that's kind of it. But now everyone lives and dies on advertising, and they are that whole thing now is like, we just need to get a gazillion eyeballs, because 1/100th of 1% of a gazillion is profit.
Yeah.
And you're in this really weird thing. It reminds me of like, why do spammers exist? Like, what do they get out of that? But like, what the heck do they get out of that? Just for like these
Yeah.
random emails that don't mean anything? Do they actually make any money? Like, what is going on?
Dude, I saw I'm not on TikTok, but like sometimes I'll see TikTok videos on Facebook or other places, and there's this group of, I'm sure there's lots of them, but there's this one group of, I mean, they're kids, they're in their teens, I'm sure. And they just do all these goofy, like, they're almost like minute to win it challenge kind of things, but it's in like this really quick, like TikTok-y, snappy kind of way. But they have tons of like, they use Doritos and, Pepsi and like all these branded things. And I'm like, and, they've got millions of views and all these different things. I'm like, these people are definitely sponsored by this stuff. And they just find any way possible to advertise. It's like, it's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting too that, like, I think back to the way Facebook started. At first it was like, you had to know somebody that could get you in to Facebook, or you had to have a college.
It was only college at first, like that.
Yeah, you had to have like a college email. Like you couldn't use just any old email. Man, I mean, like I think Mark Zuckerberg totally knew what he was doing. Like he got us hooked into it, and then he's like, once everybody's like fully invested in Facebook, then he's like, all right, let's bring the marketers in. And basically that's a parable for all of life, I think.
Yeah,
we figure out how to get our hooks deep into people, and then we press play on the Matrix.
Exactly.
So Chris Skaggs, fellow Chris, first Chris, you are the the head boss bro for Soma Games. I think that's your official title, right?
I think it's head boss bro, yeah. It was a change of title when I used to be like Supreme Master of Time and Space, but that was seen to be a little bit insensitive.
I could see that.
What up, my nerds? We here at Love Thy Nerd are beyond honored that you let our podcast blast in your earbuds each week, but we're also a jealous ministry who wants even more of your love and devotion. If you haven't made LTN Radio a part of your daily routine yet, you are missing out. Not only do you get to hear our exclusive morning shows, Church Nerds and the Back Row Morning Show, before they are put on the website, but you also get radio exclusive shows like Bible Thump with Drew Dixon, LTN Rewind, Faith and Fandom 180 with Hector Mirai, The Moment with Megan Mo Oaks, Nerd History, Nerdy Definitions, This Week in Nerdy News, and our LTN specials as well. And on top of all that, the rest of our airtime is jam-packed with the absolute best mix of Christian rock, rap, pop, and indie that is hand-curated by Love Thy Nerd just for you. Give us a listen at ltnonair.com or download the Live 365 app on your smartphone to search and favorite LTN Radio. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the show.
So, yeah, tell us about Soma.
Soma Games started on paper in 2005, and to be really honest, it was a supernatural chain of events that I view and always have viewed as where I wasn't really volunteering for this job. I was sort of drafted, and there's I can tell the long story, but it's a long story. The bottom line is over a couple of days, I was suddenly introduced to that Christian gaming was even a thing. Then became with the Christian Game Developers Conference, got connected there, and next thing you know, I'm on TV trying to represent the entire quote Christian game industry, which, to be clear, includes not just people making Bible games, but basically Christians who are making indie games.
Yeah. Where were you on TV? Was that because you're up in the Northwest?
Yeah, so this was actually a show out in Boston, and what happened is this was right when the infamous hot coffee mod story was going on with Grand Theft Auto.
Oh yeah,
and so it was all over the news.
For Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, right?
Correct.
What was? Yeah. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Explain.
What? So the story was that there was this hidden pornographic scene in the game, and if you I don't remember what this code or whatever.
Oh
whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm kind of remembering this.
And so all of a sudden, like, it was this giant thing, and Congress got involved, and Hillary Clinton was shaking her fist, and Sony pulled it from the shelves. It was a big brouhaha. And so right in the middle of that was when, I'm reading some of these stories in the news, and there's a sidebar that's like, hey, if you like games maybe that aren't about stealing cars and beating up hookers, there's these Christian gamers, right? So that's cool too. And that's kind of how I got involved. And the next thing you knew, I'm on TV. And so it was the kind of thing where it was very providential. It was very unexpected. And I literally had not thought about this as a thing until like 4 days ahead of that. And all of a sudden I'm in this case. And it was a remarkable experience for me. And there's a lot more to it, about how all of that happened without me doing anything. I was just like, God just said, you should do this thing. And then all these other people, they paid for the plane tickets. They paid for like everything else came together without me doing it. And anyways, it was quite a remarkable experience.
Did you have, I mean, prior to that, like, had you made games? Did you have that kind of developer side or the creative side? Like,
I generally say no. Yeah, I generally say no, and the reason why is at the time I owned a web development shop, and so we were in computers, but not gaming.
Yeah. Sure.
But I'll tell you, as I've come back to this, I realize that's not entirely true, because when I was in high school, probably junior high and high school, really computer graphics were pretty new, and that's what I wanted to do with my life. Yeah. I'm old, exactly. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking back to like when it was a flying logo in space felt like the pinnacle of rendered images. And back then, that's what I wanted to do. I played adventure construction set on EA and this kind of thing. And so in a way, I really was in gaming. My buddies and I made a text adventure game along kind of the paths of what Scott Adams used to do. And so I really was making games back then, but it was just a hobby. It was a thing that I did. There's a fun story though about how I lost my dreams. I got out of high school and I thought, let's do computer graphics. That'll be my major, right? I'll go into this field. And it's literally my first day at college, and you're just meeting people in the cafeteria. And so some random person sits down and we're, hi, I'm Chris. Hi, I'm Dave. And eventually I get around to telling him, hey, I want to get into computer graphics. And I swear, like without blinking or pausing, he just says, that's got to be the most tedious, horrible job I can imagine. Oh, I got to go.
See you later.
And I'm like, oh no. And I suddenly realized that I had no idea what I was getting into. I didn't know what was involved. I just realized that I had gone into this totally like sheep to the slaughter. Right? And I totally lost my dream. I stopped. Like that one day I changed my major. I floundered. I wandered around. I joined the Navy, which by the way turned out to be really good. But there was like 20 years in there where I just had no thought of this. And it was fairly recently that it felt like God came back and says, do you even remember that this is where you started? And I had this big like, no, I'd forgotten all of that. So there you go. But anyway, so Soma Games sort of started in that way in 2005. We wrote our first code in 2008. That's when the iPhone came out and you could make a game for less than $1 million. And that really started kind of where Soma Games came. And so now we're continuing to make games. We've done some hundreds of mobile games and console games, and we just recently kind of finished our work on the big Redwall franchise, which has been a blast.
So that project is complete.
It is complete from the production side. Now we have to actually sell it. So that becomes the next big step.
Yeah.
So you did all the easy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Piece of cake. It's a walk from here.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about that gig. Like, how many Redwall games have you guys made now?
I want to say.
And what is Redwall?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, if you don't know Redwall, you're kind of sleeping. So Redwall is a series of books. It's about mice with swords, and they have adventures, and not just mice, but it's all these other critters. And so these anthropomorphic animals who live in kind of a medieval world, and they have adventures. And so they're just wonderful books, kind of aimed at the young adult.
Yeah, it was like a book series from. Yeah, it was like the 90s or like.
Yep, the 90s exactly. And if you don't, it's one of these places where if you know Redwall, like it was a big deal. If you don't know Redwall, like you've never heard of it. So there's this really interesting black and white kind of thing. Yeah. But it's sold like 35 million copies. It's some of the best-selling books ever. But it's never been into games or anything. And so it was just these novels, which were really successful. Well, we got involved because back in 2011, maybe it was 2010, but right around there, kind of a friend of a friend called us, and he had acquired the rights to make a movie. In fact, he'd acquired a bunch of rights, I think, to do a master license. And he asked us if we could make like this small little mobile game just to support what else he was doing. And that's how we first got involved. Funny thing was, I had this call with this gentleman, but at the time I had never heard of Redwall either. And and right now it was just sort of fishing, right? It's like, could you do this thing? Yeah, we could probably do this thing. All right, I'll get back to you later. But that night, my business partner, Joan Berquist, had a dream in which we were working on a big Redwall game. Now, he wasn't part of that call. So it's just a fun little kind of like, he has this dream, and he calls me and says, "Are we working on a game with this?" And I said, "It's funny. Yeah. You should ask. This just happened." And then that exact same day, we learned this like a week later. That was the day that the author actually passed away. And so kind of the hair goes up under our arms, like, okay, that's weird. Like, what's going on here? But next thing you know is of course, the author's passing through a lot of stuff up into the air, right? All the legal stuff. And so there were several years there where no one was really sure what was going to go on with the license and the legal and everything else. This gentleman wound up kind of losing his opportunity to make a movie, but we stayed in the mix with games, and so we just kept working on these things, both as from story and pre-production, all that kind of stuff. And that's really kept us at the center, really since 2014, 15. That was the center of our operation. And so we got some investment, we made some partners, and now I think that we've got basically an episodic console game on PC, Xbox, and Steam. Right now, one of those episodes is live. 2 other episodes are coming this year. I should say kind of like promoted more than live, but anyways. And then we've got 3 mobile games, and then even a game on Alexa. So we've stayed pretty busy.
How does the Alexa game work?
So you think like a text adventure game kind of idea, but here it's just all by voice. And so now it's like interactive radio drama, right? So Alexa we recorded all the voiceovers and usually it's, okay, so you get to the tunnel, you want to go left or right, and you say go right, and then it proceeds with the story. So you can play it in your car, you can play it just as you're chopping onions. I think conceptually it was a really fun idea. I don't think Alexa buyers buy anything. It's not clear to me those apps sell a darn thing.
They just collect information to sell you things on Amazon.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. They're just spying on us to get us to purchase. Yeah, exactly.
This week in nerd history, yikes. Nerd history. I know that wasn't a very descriptive intro, but you'll understand what I mean, because back on March 16th in 1994, Cactus Jack, played by Mick Foley, a pro wrestling legend, lost an ear during his match with Big Van Vader when he became entangled in the ropes during a hangman spot. WCW had been using elevator cables wrapped in rubber instead of actual ropes. So when Jack, Mick Foley, was tied up by the head, the circulation had begun to cut off from his brain. When he finally freed himself, 2/3 of his ear was torn loose in the process. The ear was actually picked up by the referee and put on ice, and Foley had surgery to reattach the cartilage to his head so that a full reconstruction would be possible. But even to this day, that ear is a little bit nubby. So yeah, yikes. I'm Radio Matt. See you next time for more Nerd History.
What are you most proud of that in this Redwall project? Like, what are you most excited about?
Honestly, it's our team. Our team is something that grew from
what a good boss. What an
exactly
answer.
Right. But as an organization, like we grew from like 3 people to at one point kind of 30, and it was I should say it is a team that's really cohesive, working well and doing great work. And I'm excited about what we can do now. I'm not trying to brag here, but I think in the Christian game space, we're probably the biggest that's out there right now. I think, and we're the longest standing. So it's a strange little, award to have. You're the longest lasting Christian game company in history, which means, which means a couple of years, right? It's not a big deal, but but I think that's a cool accomplishment. And we got to work with, like, this is such a fun IP. If you don't know the books, like, yeah, they're a blast. So it was really fun.
And you can, like, episode 1 right now is live on Steam, right?
Correct. In fact, that first episode went live about 2 years ago. And I think it's fair to say it was kind of our
Yeah, there's
access.
an interesting story there. Like, we had talked before about this a little bit.
Yeah. So it was kind of early access prototype thing. For one thing, we expected a lot. We expected the Redwall readers to be our main audience, which they have been delightful. But what we didn't expect is how many just gamers would play that didn't have any value for Redwall, and so they don't. Yeah, and so they don't give us any passes, and so for them it's just gameplay.
No grace you're getting from those folks.
Yeah, and so in that regard, like, the game was just really weak on the. I don't want to say really weak. We didn't totally flub it, but it was too weak on the gameplay side, and we had to go back and fix a bunch of stuff, which I think that we really have. And so, really, any minute now. In fact, we're finishing up this week. We're going to have a big retrofit of Act 1 that will make it consistent with the other acts. And I'm really looking forward to how that gets received.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear about that too, because actually this is kind of random, but last night I was, just scrolling through Facebook videos, and I was watching a video from some gaming site, something, and they were talking about it was a list of the 10 games that were released and kind of like, didn't meet expectations, or like people didn't like it or didn't live up to the hype or whatever. But then after, updates or whatever, they just like came back with a vengeance kind of thing. Oh. And it was like really cool to see, like, I mean, prime example for me is No Man's Sky. Like, dude, that game was an absolute disaster when it came out. Like, people were just mad. They're sending death threats to the developers, like all this crazy stuff. I don't think you guys got any death threats about episode 1, but at least I hope not. But then, like,
I would never put it past the gaming community.
I wouldn't either. Yeah, these mice suck, and I'm going to kill you. But now, No Man's Sky. I mean, it's been what, 4 years, 3 or 4 years. Like, it is hailed as this just marvel of game design, and like the updates that they could have cut and run. Like, they could have just said, okay, we screwed the pooch on that one and we got to just go. But they just stuck with it. They're still doing updates. And there was a bunch of other examples too, but I'm excited to see like what happens for you guys. Cause when you told, when we talked before and you told us you were doing that, I thought that was really cool. Cause, like, you guys could have just probably cut and run too, like release the other 2 episodes and
called it good.
Yeah.
I think that's a dishonorable way to go, though, and for everybody, for the fans, for one thing, but also for your own work. Like, I think about you, everyone here. For one thing, it's easy to look in hindsight and say, yeah, we got kind of wrapped up in our own vision, right? You can see where you made mistakes and you could have done better, but everyone did it with integrity and honesty. It's just that you missed some pieces.
Yeah.
But to walk away from something like that and kind of hope that everyone forgets and try again, I think it would be dishonorable, and everyone would feel really disappointed, like, oh, we suck. It's so, and as long as you got the funds for it, that's the trick. You got to have the funds to keep doing it. Like, everyone wants to make the game that they're proud of. Everyone wants to make the experience that sort of fulfills the vision that you started with. And so, and honestly, these days, I think that the money is always in the long tail. And so for No Man's Sky, like, even if you miss day 1, like, when you get year 3, 4, 5, like, that more than makes up for it. So I think that's also the best economic way to go.
Yeah. And it's an interesting time to be in the industry too, because like, live updates and that kind of stuff, that didn't exist at one point in time. Yeah. Like, your game was your game and you didn't get any do-overs. You didn't get any chances to release a day 1 patch or a day 340 patch or anything, Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's just the gold bits is a non-issue anymore, right? That just doesn't happen. In fact, do you even know that term?
I think there's even too, there's like, there's been such success in the indie space now. And there's been some kind of melding of a little bit of AAA and indie type studios. Like, I think maybe your studio is kind of an example now because, you've grown so much. So it's
at
kind
what
of,
point can you not be indie anymore? Like, how many employees?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. if your studio is bigger than 3 people or something, I think there's this weird expectation amongst gamers that the production value be, the same as Assassin's Creed or something. And I think that's really unrealistic. And also, I mean, I think it's that space where you guys are at, that, 30 people or so making a game, that's really interesting to me, because you still can have a level of artistic control, I think, over a project that I find to be like really compelling. I don't know, is that important to you to feel like you guys have a lot of the reins of where this project is going, and it's not so big that nobody really makes much of a contribution?
I think that's a huge thing. For one thing, like for Soma, I think our corporate culture is very familial. It's very flat. Like, it's not hierarchical. Everyone has an idea. Everyone's ideas are valued, and you just that's not possible. I don't know where the cutoff is, but somewhere a little bit north of us, like, that's just not a thing that can work. But that's something we really value. So from a cultural, kind of a corporate culture perspective, everyone participates, and I can look at any one scene and I can be like, oh yeah, I know who made that asset. I know who made that sound effect. I know how everyone knows what everyone did, and it's really this cool symphony. And that's one of the things I was saying, like, what I'm so proud of our team about is how much we coalesced into like a good working team that at first wasn't just a bunch of creatives who, kind of throw everything at the wall and there's no scope control, but also we're able to get professional enough to make decisions, to, cut things that need to be cut. And so that's really cool. But I wouldn't ever want to lose that. I don't want to be a 200-person studio. And for us, I think that would ruin what Soma is about. And I guess maybe it's probably just honest to say, like, we always saw that gaming was kind of a means to an end, in the sense that I think that Soma's mission is not specifically to make games. We have a very apostolic mission. So going back to 2005, I felt like what God asked us to do was to kind of colonize and infiltrate the game industry, which is lots of people have said that, right? So I know that we're not new in that idea, but taking that mission from a long-term play, I don't think it's a product question. Like, making a good video game by Christians isn't going to change the world. It's just not. But making thousands or at least hundreds of people who have that kind of like ethos, that really could. There's this idea that it takes 10% of a culture to have an idea before that culture can change. I can't remember who said this, one of these demographic people. And when you realize
Jesus, I think Jesus said that.
It could be Jesus. Yeah. I think he liked us talking statistics. When you realize that, like, the whole game industry is like 50,000 people, like, that's everybody. Then you think 5,000 people is a workable number. Like, we can reach that goal. Like, I can reach 5,000 people. And that's so different from people who want to change the movie industry, where you'd have to change like 1 million people, right? Yeah. To make an impact. So anyways,
I wonder if you could say like more about what you mean when you say you want to like colonize the games industry, because I think I know what you mean, but I also think there's this segment of people who find that to be a really dirty word. You know what I mean? So I just want to give you the opportunity to say more.
I appreciate that. So I don't mean colonize in the British Empire sense. I mean colonize in the sense of yeast, like bacteria. So Jesus talks about how you put a little bit of leaven, right, in a loaf of bread, and it does everything. So for me, the question for us is like, we just want to get some ideas into the industry that can take root and grow on their own organically. And so in that regard, it's not a question of like, this is kind of our version of Christian culture. It's rather like, what could things be that would be good for everybody? So it's really easy to pick up the crunch culture as an example, right? But I think, and it's real, the complaint is real. But on the other hand, it's really easy just to complain. And what would it actually look like to have a work environment and work practices and things that are both economically and spiritually and humanly possible, and you do it because you proved it. So for example, the idea, like with crunch, partly it's this notion of no one's against working hard and doing. I don't think that anyone's against overtime when you need to get something done. But when your expectation is that you're just constantly in overtime because you're driven by, maybe it's a publisher, maybe it's these marketing deadlines, when those things are driving people to lose their families, to burn out in the industry, to divorce, like you've got to see the fruit of that's bad. And so we make a point here, like crunch is a non-starter. And so we make some really deliberate practices that are designed not to be Christian, but to be healthy. And so every single person on our crew, as a piece of that, like just taking a day off. So like, to use the Jesus word, it's Sabbath, right? But just take a break. Maybe that everybody has to do this, because otherwise you fry. We have to make sure that not only do we do that as a principle, and even when that's painful, because it's deadline time, and are you going to practice what you preach? But also that from a place of authority, if you're a project manager or you're the boss, like you also have to make sure that the people under you not only are able to rest, but that they're expected to rest, right? And sometimes intervene with someone, because you get artists and creatives who are excited about what they do, and they'll happily like fry themselves because they're passionate. And so sometimes you have to be like, dude, it's time to go home, right? And that's a piece. But the notion that we could set an example because we made this a business practice, we did it, like we practiced it, and it actually saves us money. You just got to prove it, and then that can be the kind of idea that can colonize an industry because it's a good idea, and good ideas bear fruit; they spread.
Yeah. That's a really great clarification, and I think like that's not about crunch specifically, but that's something that even with us, with Love Thy Nerd, from the beginning has been a conversation of like, how can we not only highlight the beautiful and wonderful things about nerd culture, but how can we also speak truth and hope into the areas that do suck? And I'm glad. What a great question, Drew, to have him clarify that, because I think that was really valuable stuff in there. That's cool.
Well, if you'd like, can I also, like, I think I used another word, infiltrate. And so I choose that word because I've seen other Christian companies who really have a more militaristic, like they would use more words like invade, right? Like, we got to get in there, we got to bust some skulls, we got to change things. And that's just not like, we want to be invited in. We want to make sure that whatever we're providing, whatever we're offering is because we were invited to the table, not because we forced our way to it, right? And so in that regard, and there's another aspect to that is, which you heard me speak to earlier, like this cannot ever, like what we're trying to do could never be about Soma Games. It has to be about 100 companies. It has to be about thousands of individual creators. And if we just happen to kind of, we take our stand on the line, but then also move people through our company so that they go start other ones or go off to Activision and Riot and everything else, but they sort of bring that same spirit of Christ with them. That's a better way to do it. Then that's grassroots, that's distributed, and then
to use a churchy word, that's discipleship.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a way better path.
Yeah, and I think like, I don't know, there's fear amongst people about there's some people that hear this conversation and go like, sorry, but we don't want your Christian stuff in our in our game space or whatever. Maybe understandably, maybe not, but I think what you're saying is really compelling because it's there is a lot of what's dysfunction, I think maybe the right word, in the games industry. I mean, just go back to that example of crunch. I think it's a bigger problem in the games industry because there's so much competition. Like, we talked to a guy recently who worked at Blizzard, and if you decide you don't want to put in the time that is necessary to get the next, there's not another StarCraft plan, but that I know of, but let's just pretend they're working on StarCraft 3. Like, if you don't want to put in the work,
you can dream, Drew. You can dream.
There's like thousands of people that want that job.
Yep.
It's a really hard problem to fix. And so
but it's not. See, here's why that's a problem, is because the industry is so product focused and they're not people focused. And so when you see this as a people question, then it's not a hard problem to solve at all, because I start investing in people because because of who they are, not because of what they can provide me. And this is as the owner, right? So most of our team here started here with no experience, but what they sort of showed up, and there was a culture match, and then we want to train them and grow them and build them, and we want to make sure that they thrive as humans, not just can you get me the texture I guess fast as possible. And so that also, like, these things become interconnected. So I totally know what your friend is saying. Like, that does seem to be the culture, but also the solve's not that hard. Like, it's right at your hand. It's like, are you looking at product or are you looking at people?
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah. It's hard when your bottom line is money.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to say, I think what you're talking about is an example of how, and I don't know if our non-Christian audience who's hearing this would agree, but I would hope they would, like, that it's not as scary as as they might think. Like, if we could take because I think what you're talking about is sort of a Christian view of work. It's not as creepy as you might think. Like, we would all benefit from taking a hard look at our understanding of work, because how many companies really, like, have that mentality of, like, I'm not just going to invest in this product. Yes, this product has to do well, or a company may not, may not be able to employ as many people, et cetera, but, like, my goal is to invest in you and to help you thrive. Like, that's a really beautiful idea that we all need to give more thought to, I think.
There's a way of Tim Keller talks about this a lot, but this idea of common grace, where the notion is that, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, and this whole basic idea is, like, I think when Christian culture is done well, it's not about the creepy stuff, which is like, you got to do as I tell you to do, and these are the rules, and toe the line or you're going to hell. Like, it's not that. It's the thing that says, like, how can we make everybody flourish? What's good for everybody? And then I think that everyone understands what unethical behavior looks like, right? Like exploitation, this kind of stuff. That's pretty easy to call out. And you see a lot of people, and a lot of Christian people, but not exclusively so. They're happy to be ethical, right? Let's not exploit people. But there's a whole nother level, which Praxis calls, the Praxis Labs, they call the redemptive frame. It's like, you go farther than that to make every aspect of what you're doing better for everybody. And almost always that represents sacrifice. That's going to be a less on your bottom line. It's going to be perhaps smaller paychecks or whatever. But if you thrive on instead of being burned out, like, everyone sees that that's a trade that's well worth it.
Yeah, I think we have to do more work to like structure, like any Christian organization or whatever. There needs to be more thought given to how do we position this such that we're focused on human flourishing? Because I think so often a lot of Christian art, a lot of Christian projects, a lot of Christian organizations end up seeming to be more about building, their own
brand,
their own little kingdom or their own brand, or and I think we all need to step back and think about the things you're talking about. Like, what does it look like to develop Love Thy Nerd, for instance? What does it look like to build this organization such that we never lose focus of, like, helping other people's lives be better?
What's helped you guys, Chris, like with Soma? You've been around for a while. Like, what's helped with keeping that kind of laser focus? Or have there been times where you've, strayed off the path? Like, what's helped in that?
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that we have strayed off the path. I don't think in any really horrible ways, but one thing is, like you want to identify some standards before they become tested. Like, you never want to do that in the middle of it, right? So when someone comes to us and they want to spend a lot of money because they want to make a wet T-shirt game, just having a notion that says, you know what, I'm not interested, and in this case, like, your money isn't. I don't want it, right? One of the very first things God told us, like one of the mission statements, was, I need people who can't be bought. And you go into a space like this where, frankly, like, there's a lot of opportunity for money. And there's also a lot of opportunity for poverty. But you still get the idea, like, you have to have those standards ahead of But I would say on other times, we've been very distracted, especially just by how do you keep the bills paid, and that you take any gig you can. And a true story, like we had a guy who wanted to build an app. This is really kind of when Soma Games was more just kind of pre-concept, like you're sort of working on things. And so we have this other side of our business that makes software for hire. And this guy wanted to make a bong app, right? A water bong app. And we're like, that would never, I'm telling him, I was like, no, that would never get past Apple. It's like, they don't allow drugs. He's like, no, it's not for drugs. It's for tobacco. And and he's like, and anyways, like, I don't, I'm not worried about it. I just want to see. And I confess at the time we were like, I don't know, like maybe it is about tobacco, right? And it's good money, and I don't know, like, and so you find yourself in these moments, but if you don't have a framework at the time to say what you're willing to do and what you're not, then it just becomes tempting in the moment, and you justify everything. But to your bigger question, Chris, like what keeps us on track is we have to be really deliberate about a couple key things, and you only need to do a couple things well. Don't make it too complicated. So for us, it was about what are the core values, and they always can call you back to it, right? So for us, the idea of our family, like our corporate culture, is a huge key value, and you have to invest in that, which means in our case, like some of the easiest things is we have events, right? So that's a potluck here, it's a Christmas party there, it's celebrating people's birthdays. It's just little things, but you make sure that those are actually non-negotiable. And they're little tiny things that someone's in charge of. You are the minister of birthdays, Becky. And so you make sure that everyone finds out that they get cake on their birthday. And so if you do that, there's this idea of sort of the long obedience in a single direction. And what was hard one year becomes normal the next year, which becomes habit in the third year. And it's worth the repetition. And I would say like that's probably the easiest thing is just set those goals up front, make little sacrifices to make them real, and then just keep practicing them. I think we have this bad habit in sort of Christian study circles. Like it's the next thing, it's the next thing, it's the next thing. Did you read this book? Did you read this book? Did you do that study? Did you do that study? And we just consume this material, and it's good material, but everyone's just kind of scraping the cheese off the top, and it's rare that someone will stick with a book for say 3 years just to suck the marrow out of it. And I think that would be a good way to start.
I love that, man. That's some great advice about creating culture within for anybody listening that's wanting to start something or you're already a boss or a manager of people or anything like that. Like that everything you just said to me is people focused, not product focused.
Yeah, I hope so. And probably a thing of that is you got to be correctable. And so Chris, Drew, like as we get to know each other a little bit better, like probably not on the podcast, but I would love for you to also correct us if you see that we are not living up to those standards. And
I'm glad you
mean
asked. I actually have a list here.
But I really mean that sincerely. Yeah. Like it's important, I think, especially as believers, like we have to be willing to point out the specks in one another's eyes. Do it with love, do it with grace, but I mean that. And we've had people come alongside like, you say this, but it's not really working. And it hurts when you hear it, but it's also truth, and that's good.
It's Mo from the Back Row Morning Show, and I've got 5 random facts for you. Once the park closes for the night, feral cats prowl the streets of Disneyland, keeping the rodent population under control. Disneyland has been using them as pest control ever since feeding them and giving them medical care in addition to housing. Nearly 3% of the ice in Antarctic glaciers is penguin urine. Video games might slow down the aging process. In one study, just 10 hours of play led to increased cognitive functioning in participants 50 years and older, improvement that lasted for several years. The M's in M&M's stands for Mars and Murray, Forrest Mars and Bruce Murray, the 2 businessmen who created the candy-coated chocolates. And Donkey Kong Jr., the 1982 sequel to Donkey Kong, is the only video game where Mario officially stars as the villain. For more fun facts and hilarious nonsense, tune in to the Back Row Morning Show Monday through Thursday at 7 a.m. and again at 9 a.m. Central here on LTN Radio.
So we always like to get a little bit personal on this podcast, and I realize we've done some of that, but we'd like to hear like your story. So obviously, you're a Christian because you've talked about that a good bit already. But did you grow up in the church, or what was?
Yeah, where'd you grow up? Did you grow up in the Northwest?
No, I grew up down in Southern California in a mountain town called Running Springs, and so
that's right. We had this conversation. It's by Big Bear.
By Big Bear, exactly. So if you go to Big Bear, you might stop for gas on the way to Running Springs, but otherwise never notice it. Little tiny place, and it was a beautiful place to grow up. Like I really loved it.
Are you a mountain guy, like skiing?
Love that, and you grew up skiing where the Snow Valley was like a 10-minute drive from my school, right? So like every day after school, and especially on weekdays, you just up there in 2-3 hours in the afternoon, evening, and it was awesome. That was a great place to grow up.
Oh man, I'm not jealous at all.
My parents were both sort of like ex-Christians in the sense that they grew up in a church. One of them was Catholic, one of them was Episcopalian. And not that there was anything bad, but by the time they were adults, they're like, there's just nothing here for us, right? They experienced it as kind of dead at a club. And so they weren't really into it, but they weren't hostile either. So I grew up in this kind of place where mom and dad didn't do anything. They certainly didn't teach me anything. But the language was sort of like embedded in little places. Like every Easter when we'd visit grandma, you're supposed to go to midnight mass. Every single Easter, you're supposed to go to midnight mass. Nobody ever does, right? So like, well, I don't even know what that is. But I just heard about it. So by the time I was in high school, I really fancied myself an agnostic, and made fun of Christians because I was, because you think you're smarter than them, and so that's where I would have put myself. But then also somewhere around my freshman sophomore year. Long story short, is I got cast in a play, which took me away from the group of friends that I was with, who really we were starting to get into a lot of pot and and cocaine, and every once in a while something harder. And I was kind of going down a different path. But what this play did is one night I was at a rehearsal and my buddy stole a boat and got arrested, and I had kind of a moment of, wow, that could have been me, right? That would have been bad. And I sort of changed my friend circle at that point. In the drama geeks, there were a lot of Christians in there, and they had cute girls at the youth group, so I started hanging out with them. But really, for me, my faith became real when I was in the Navy. So this is years later, and I'm out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean staring at the stars. And I read everything on the ship's library from C.S. Lewis, which for the first time for me made a lot of sense, because Lewis addressed my biggest fear, is that I didn't want to be a fool. Like I just couldn't, I couldn't bear the thought that I would be an idiot. And so Lewis gave me an intellectual framework. I'm like, oh, smart people can believe in this too.
That's why I can't understand C.S. Lewis at all. Makes sense. This totally checks out.
Man, different strokes for different folks, man.
Yeah.
So he spoke to me in that regard, and then next thing you know, I'm talking to God and he's talking back, and that's how it all started.
Was there a particular book by Lewis that sort of helped reframe things for you?
Totally blew the doors open. Everything past that I loved. Great Divorce is still probably my favorite, but it was Mere Christianity that opened the door, and everything else was follow on.
So you're in the Navy and you're reading C.S. Lewis, and what I guess you came back and got, or during that time, that's when you kind of got serious about your faith.
I'll tell you a story. For me, so much of my experience with God was feeling, for lack of a better word, kind of the romance of it. In fact, if you've ever read Sacred Romance, this is a great story, because God really was wooing me through beauty at that time, and stuff that there's this time when I'm working the night shift, and so I get off my shift and it's sunrise, and we're in the middle of the sea, and there's this other ship right next to us, and it's basically a refueling ship, and so he's right next to us, and there's these big pipes strung between the two ships, and they're transferring fuel and whatever else they do. And so there's probably 50 yards between the ships, maybe not even that much. And these pipes are kind of dipping into the water. They're kind of these slung like garlands. And I'm looking out on the hangar bay to this sunrise, and it's just breathtaking. If you've never been out in the blue water, there's nothing like it. It's incredible. But this is even more incredible. It's this gorgeous morning, and off in the sunrise, you see these porpoise, like this big school or pod or whatever they're called of porpoise, and they're all dancing, having a good time. And next thing you know, they all decide to change, like a flock of birds. They all change course at once, and they decide they're going to come between the ships and thread the needle. And so this huge pod just narrows down to this little gap and starts jumping over the pipes, and they're like spinning and flipping and clicking. And all these people are watching like, this cannot be real. Like, this is so gorgeous, just the beauty of it, and the sunrise, and the salt spray. It was just this overwhelming sense of where your heart is pierced by the beauty of it. And that was one of the moments where I just felt God's arms around me so strongly. There was such a sense of love, and not just me, but like the whole world, you know. And it was a powerful moment. And there were lots of moments like that, especially on that Westpac, that beauty has become a central aspect of how I experience him. And probably that's also one of the core values for Soma that I brought into. It's like, this has to be about beauty. I think that beauty has its own way of ministering to the world that's even deeper than love. So I guess that's where things got real for me. I come home, you know, I have to move out from my live-in girlfriend and kind of change a bunch of other things in my life, but that brought me to the Northwest. And that's kind of where I settled down. The next really big change for me was when I read a book called Wild at Heart, which at the time was just perfectly timed for where I was in my story. And what Wild at Heart did for me is it spoke to a different question. Like, if one question for me was like, is God real? There's a second question that's something like, where do I fit in all this? And Wild at Heart gave me a language and a purpose that I was missing. And that was another huge catalytic event for me. That's what got me involved with ministry. And really, it was just a couple of weeks after I went to this boot camp event where the whole story with Soma happened. And in my mind, these are very closely linked. Like, the event prepared me to hear God invite me on an adventure. And he did. And here we are.
I think that's something that I resonate with too. And like a really powerful piece of C.S. Lewis's writings in my life are the sermon he preached called The Weight of Glory. So there's this part in there where he talks about human beings being a real ingredient in the divine happiness that I think has just always kind of stuck with me. I think there have been times in my life where I've had to like grapple with this feeling like Christianity was really formulaic and very kind of dry. It's about like believing the right things about God, but I'm not sure. I'm not like I think God loves me probably, but I'm not sure that like it can be easy to, in some Christian circles, I think, to feel like God just kind of tolerates us, you know? And that sermon sort of was really corrected that sort of fear that God basically just puts up with me. Because the whole point, a big point of that sermon is that God's actually pretty passionate about us and pretty devoted to us. And, you know, if that's true of the gospel, then that's a lot more exciting and a lot more, like motivating for me to get serious about my faith, than this idea of like, well, you're exactly. Okay, I'll put up with you.
I guess my son died, so I got to do this.
Relate to that, but yeah. So where you're married and you have kids? Is that yes. Right? Where are you at?
Full disclosure, even for your Christian audience, I'm actually remarried. So I was married for 15 years.
Okay.
Had two kids, Odin and Athena. So I think it was important for a Christian to name his kids after pagan gods, but that's a different talk.
I'm here for it.
Yeah, that's great.
So I was actually divorced about 5 years ago, and then remarried about 2 years ago. And so that's where I am now. Odin and Athena are just starting high school and middle school, and Samantha is my bride, and there's my story. That's where I am.
Was there, you don't have to answer, but with divorce stuff, like was there, it's a stigma thing in Christian culture, in certain Christian cultures, right? Like, did you have a lot of blowback from that?
Definitely some. And it's, I don't mind talking about it. So I think for a lot of years, for a few years, I didn't know how to talk about it, not because I was unwilling, but there's a place where I don't want to cast any shade. But at the same time, I don't want to sort of like take ownership for stuff that's not mine. And so there's this middle ground that it's had a hard time for me to figure out just how to talk to about with respect and honesty at the same time. So long story short, yes, I have had some blowback, but I don't think nearly as much as you might expect. The truth of the matter is that divorce is so common in the church now. It's just, stigma or not, there's too many people who've done it. There's too many people who've been through it. And so you can't stigmatize half the church, right? You just can't. Right. There's just too many of us. So I would say, So in that regard, I would say probably if anything that was an issue is that there wasn't a lot of understanding in the sense, like, I don't know what to do with you. Like, I don't condemn you, but I don't know what to do with you. And I think, everyone would tell stories like, you just can't help for people who wind up sort of taking sides. And that's a shame. But on the other hand, I have a lot of sympathy for that. It's like, okay, if you're friends with both of us, it would be really, really hard to continue to be friends with both of us because it's a sensitive topic. And I recognize that. Like it's a gnarly spot. But some people handled it better than others. So I definitely got hurt. I would say, but I also had some really great support. And probably the best thing that I did in that season was to give myself permission to be pissed off and to grieve and to be angry and hurt and sad. And they all came out in whatever order kind of they just felt needed to happen. And I spent a lot of time just staring at the wall, being sad, especially when your kids go back to your ex-wife's house and you're alone. That's really that's a bitter time. So, but I'm not afraid of my story. So I'm not afraid to talk about it. I'm not shy about it. I'm happy you asked.
No, and I'm glad you did, Chris, and I'm glad you brought it up because I do think there's this weird in some segments of Christianity or evangelicalism or whatever that's like when anybody talks about divorce that we get this weird like almost people have been like trained to try and be like, okay, well, let's figure out which one of you is wrong in this situation. And let's see if this was a legitimate quote unquote divorce and blah, blah, blah. I definitely had those kind of conversations in seminary. And then when I actually met people who were going through divorce, I realized those were really unhelpful conversations, and what people need who are going through that is support and love. And, it's like you said, I have some really close friends that have gone through it. And, what they needed from me in those moments was like a good friend, who would be around and make them feel a little bit less lonely. Cause it's super isolating thing to go through. And, so I appreciate your,
thanks for sharing.
forthrightness about it. Yeah. So, we're almost out of time here, but, what are you most excited about, going forward with Soma and life in general?
Probably the thing I'm most excited about now is as I mentioned earlier, like we are at this pivot point where, we've got these products and now we need to sell them. And that's frankly a whole new season for us. And so we're looking at a couple things business wise that I don't know what's the best choice. We may want a publisher. We may want a marketing partner. Like we're looking at things. In fact, we're starting a fundraising round here to try to figure out like what's the best path for selling these products out to market. But then apart from that, it's also, we've been working on Redwall a long time. And as much as I've loved it, it'd be nice to do something else. And so there's our own IP that we'd love to start working on, whether that's just the storylines or whatever else. And one of my favorite stories right now that I've been playing with is that there's this old story about St. Patrick, who he goes to this tribe and he's trying to tell them about Jesus, and they mock him and they make fun of him, and they're so noisy that he compares them to wolves, like they're just howling at him. And so Patrick's like, screw y'all. Now y'all are going to be werewolves for the rest of your life. And there's a story he turns all these tribal people into werewolves. And regardless of anything else, just that idea, like St. Patrick turned these people into werewolves, that's a great story scene. I really think that'd be a fun story to explore.
Yeah, that's great.
Especially because, here's one of the things that we look at. I think there's very, very few examples of where good people are also powerful and scary. Right. So your kids often, they want to be Darth Vader because he's powerful. They don't understand really kind of what's going on with now, frankly, Star Wars has done a better job of this than most. But the idea that goodness isn't portrayed as powerful as like, that's a really neat thought that I think is very underplayed right now. So I just think that'd be a fun story to see a St. Patrick who's a total badass. Like sort of wielding the sword of God with vengeance. I don't know. There's something in there that I want to explore without it being, I'm not to make it gruesome or something. But there's just something there I really want to explore.
Sounds pretty rad to me. Let's do it. I mean, together. You can hire me and Chris will help you make it. So if people want to follow what you guys are up to with Soma and you personally, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, the best thing is on the Facebook page for Redwall right now. Like, that's our most active place. I think as that you'll link through there probably to the Soma Games Facebook. We do have a website, but like most websites now, it's just hygiene, right? Everyone needs a website because you're supposed to have it, but the truth is we're not very active there. So Facebook is where you're going to see us the most. And then connected to that is we really try to share what we've learned along the way through basically through a podcast that we do. In fact, I interviewed you guys recently. And so that's, if you want to go to Soma Soulworks, that's kind of our, for lack of a better word, that's our ministry angle. And that's where you can see what we're up to.
Well, it was great chatting with you, Chris. This was a really fruitful conversation, I feel like, and really excited about checking out Redwall and your future work as well. So